sealing their reconciliation with a strategic energy deal. The Russian and Turkish presidents meeting in Istanbul have agreed on a project to build an undersea pipeline to get Russian gas to Turkey and then onto Europe. Ministers signed the Turk Stream Accord on the sidelines of the World Energy Congress. It's the latest sign of rapprochement since Ankara expressed regret for shooting down a Russian fighter plane over the Turkish-Syrian border last November. Despite deep differences on the Syrian conflict, the leaders were keen to show they're seeking common ground. President Erdogan saying he and his Russian counterpart had discussed cooperation, especially for the people of Aleppo, and what sort of strategy could be applied to bring peace to the area. While Turkey backs rebels fighting the Syrian regime, Russia is supporting President Assad with a massive air campaign. Nonetheless, we have a joint position when it comes to doing everything to deliver humanitarian aid to Aleppo, the Russian president said. The question is over the provision of security for delivering this aid to avoid provocations with the bombing of humanitarian convoys. Russia denies its warplanes were behind last month's deadly airstrike on an aid convoy near Aleppo.
Less than a year ago, relations between Moscow and Ankara soured after a Turkish fighter jet shot down a Russian Su-24M bomber over the Turkish-Syrian border last November. Harsh words and hostilities ensued. Vladimir Putin warned of serious consequences. Today's loss for us was like a stab in the back delivered by the accomplices of terrorists. I cannot qualify what happened today as anything else. But reconciliation came about on the 27th of June in the form of a written expression of regret from President Erdogan. Moscow then lifted its sanctions on tourism, which by June 2016 had seen arrivals of Russian visitors to Turkey slump by 93% against June 2015. In the aftermath of July's failed coup, the West saw measures taken against suspected participants as overly severe, while Erdogan bemoaned the lack of backing offered from the EU. Putin, however, was the first to offer his support to the Turkish leader. On the 9th of August, Erdogan made a state visit to St. Petersburg to seal the rapprochement, while Europe looked on, worried that the migrant agreement with Turkey was in jeopardy.
Putin was one of the first leaders to call Erdogan, and he declared unconditional support for the Turkish government, the democratically elected government of Turkey, against the coup.
After Erdogan thanked Putin for his support, which he said meant a lot psychologically, the two committed to strengthening their economic cooperation to the tune of €90 billion a year. Russia has already commenced work on Turkey's first nuclear power station in Akuyu in the south. Turkey is not rich in hydrocarbons, and President Erdogan has said he hopes the plant, which is costing an estimated €18 billion, will eventually provide 10% of Turkey's energy. The two countries are also aiming to reaffirm their commitment to completing the Russian-Turkish gas pipeline Turk Stream that could deliver 31.5 million cubic metres of Russian gas per year to Europe via the Black Sea. However, a potential sticking point remains between Moscow and Ankara. They remain at odds where Syria is concerned. The former is a key ally of Bashar al-Assad's regime, while the latter supports the rebels who want to oust him from power.
Russia says it is ready to join a proposed freeze of oil output by OPEC members. President Vladimir Putin, speaking at an energy conference in the Turkish city of Istanbul, said low oil prices have led to underinvestment in the sector, and he warned that that could trigger new unpredictable jumps in prices in the future. Putin said Russia is ready to join the collective measures to limit production and calls on other oil-exporting countries to do the same. We support a recent OPEC initiative to fix production limits and hope this idea will turn into specific agreements at an OPEC meeting in November, giving a positive signal to markets and investors. Saudi Arabia's energy minister at the same gathering said he is optimistic about reaching a deal at that November meeting, adding an oil price of $60 a barrel by the end of the year is possible. Putin did not say at what level Russia would be ready to cap its production. The country's oil output jumped in September to a new post-Soviet record high.
Saudi Arabia has said it regretted an airstrike on a funeral in Yemen that killed 142 mourners. However, the kingdom stopped short of admitting it carried out the attack. Saturday's carnage, one of the deadliest since the Saudi-led coalition began military operations in March 2015, brought a terse response from the US and the United Nations.
Saturday's funeral bombing was a heartless attack on civilians and an outrageous violation of international humanitarian law. Initial reports from the site indicate that this too was a coalition attack. Excuses ring hollow given the pattern of violence throughout the country. Parties cannot hide behind the fog of this war.
The Houthi rebel group, backed by Iran, which the Saudis are trying to remove, retaliated by firing a missile at the Taif military airbase, some 40 kilometres from the holy city of Mecca.
Eurozone finance ministers have agreed to give Greece more bailout aid. After meeting in Luxembourg, they said Athens has made enough progress on reforms. The aim is to eventually disburse €2.8 billion in bailout loans. French Finance Minister Michel Sapin speaking earlier. Greece is fulfilling its commitments, and when a country fulfills its commitments, European solidarity is conveyed. The payments will come in two parts, and they'll depend on a future review of reforms, including a privatisation programme and an overhaul of the energy sector. But the IMF says it won't give any more money until the Europeans grant Greece some debt relief. The IMF can have its own requirements. They want the issue of debt to be discussed and its burden to be significantly relieved. It's a debate that we can have with our friends in Germany. The Greek government says its debt pile will equal €315 billion this year, just over 170% of GDP. The country's current bailout programme is its third since 2010 and worth €85 billion. It runs out in 2018.
It's school time for hundreds of migrant and refugee children living in camps in Greece. Around 1,500 began attending on Monday for 4 hours every day in the afternoons, taking place after regular classes by Greek children end. Lessons include Greek, English, maths, art, gym and computer programming. The scheme's being funded by the EU and supported by aid agencies. The Education Ministry's General Secretary says today is a symbolic day and we must show that there's no problem. We want to show there's no problem. The first day did run smoothly in most areas, except for in Thessaloniki, where some parents protested over health fears. However, the government has reassured parents that the children have to be vaccinated before attending. The scheme will eventually involve 20 schools nationwide. Thousands of teachers in Poland held protests in 17 cities across the country on Monday over government plans to overhaul the public school system. Teachers' union leaders claim that a plan to eliminate middle schools and to return to a two-school model of primary followed by high school will result in larger classes and fewer teaching jobs. One protester said it was a retrograde step. This reform will completely spoil what was improved in education over the last few years. Education must be improved, but not in this way. At one gathering, Poland's education minister announced there would be more teaching jobs in the future, but her remarks were not well received. The protests come as Poland's conservative ruling party is facing growing criticism. Last week, demonstrations forced lawmakers to reject a total ban on abortion proposed by the ruling Law and Justice Party.
Just when we thought the tone of the US election couldn't get any lower, and it did during the second presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. There was no handshake. The candidates got right down to slogging it out, mainly over a video in which Trump apparently boasts about sexually assaulting women.
What we all saw and heard on Friday was Donald talking about women, what he thinks about women, what he does to women, And he has said that the video doesn't represent who he is. But I think it's clear to anyone who heard it that it represents exactly who he is. Because we've seen this throughout the campaign. We have seen him insult women. We've seen him rate women on their appearance, ranking them from 1 to 10. So, yes, this is who Donald Trump is.
Trump's comeback was in that all-too-familiar style. Hours before the debate, he held a press conference with 4 women who accused Bill Clinton of rape or sexual assault.
That was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I am a person who has great respect for people, for my family, for the people of this country, and certainly I'm not proud of it. But that was something that happened. If you look at Bill Clinton, far worse, minor words, and his was action. His was what he's done to women. There's never been anybody in the history of politics in this nation that's been so abusive to women. When Hillary brings up a point like that, and she talks about words that I said 11 years ago, I think it's disgraceful, and I think she should be ashamed of herself, if you want to know the truth.
So
it
was.
The Republican candidate acknowledged for the first time that he had not paid federal income tax for years before calling his opponent a devil and a liar. Here's an excerpt from that exchange.
Donald, I know you're into big diversion tonight. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
While Clinton remained composed, a defiant Trump seemed unable to remain in his corner. He loomed over his opponent's shoulder at every turn.
May not be able.
Only at the end, following a question from the public, did the two finally shake hands.
The world of contracts is in the spotlight as the Nobel Committee announced the winners of the Prize in Economic Sciences. British-born Oliver Hart and Finland's Bengt Holmström got the nod for their work, which covers everything from how to calculate top bosses' pay to marriage contracts. Prize Committee member Per Stromberg says it's incredibly important.
Contracts are central to get different people or parties to cooperate. Okay, so when you want 2 people or 2 firms to cooperate, you need to make sure that they work in the same direction and they're both happy with the outcome. And that's really what contract theory is about. How do you make that happen?
Holmström, who's based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, concludes high-risk industries should tend to pay fixed salaries, while in more stable environments they should be more based on performance. Hart's also in the US at Harvard. His work includes the right mix of financing for mergers and whether schools, prisons and hospitals should be in private or public ownership.